Well, the longest shutdown in U.S. history finally looks like it is over. What is in this deal is going to pass soon. Plus, the president issues some sweeping preemptive pardons for Rudy Giuliani and others involved in the 2020 election. Also, Robby Starbuck, the rock star, anti-woke, anti-DEI activist. We're going to get Robbie on the program to talk about all of that, his lawsuit against Google, and more. All of that and much more in today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. Well, just like that, the longest shutdown in U.S. history appears to be over. Just shy of its sixth week. Yes, this Tuesday evening, tomorrow evening, would have marked 6 weeks already. At the age of 40 to 41 days, this is the longest shutdown in the history of the United States. You might be forgotten for wondering what this whole shutdown was about in the first place. A point that we've been making repeatedly right here on the show is the Democrats did not exactly message what their game plan was, what their ask was. They didn't have an elevator pitch. They didn't have a brief one-page synopsis there. As you know, because you're an informed viewer and listener of the show, you know that their basic ask involved expiring Obamacare healthcare subsidies. That was the basic ask. So the rough contours of this deal, as it came out on Sunday evening, it was a 60-40 vote. You need 60 votes in the Senate, of course, to get rid of the Senate filibuster or to avoid the filibuster there. You had a number of Democrats joining Republicans. You had the two New Hampshire senators, Jeanne Shaheen and Maggie Hassan. You had Angus Kang, who was an independent from Maine but caucuses with the Democrats. You had a few others there. And the basic way that this deal works is there is a promise from the majority leader, John Thune, to vote on the expiring Obamacare subsidies sometime in December. So he's promising a vote as to whether or not to renew these healthcare subsidies. And just to refresh your memory, the reason that Democrats care so much about these expiring Obamacare subsidies is because it's the blue states that are going to get screwed by it. It's literally the most self-serving, cynical thing in the world. It is the blue Democrat states, aka the original states under the Affordable Care Act, that agreed to have the federal government manage their private healthcare insurance marketplace. It is those states that stand on average to have health insurance premiums go up by as much as 30%. On some states, actually, it could be close to doubling, depending on the state, the marketplace, on the specifics. But it is those blue states that have allowed the Fed to take over. They are the ones, by definition, who are sucked on the federal dole when it comes to these subsidies. It is the red states that did not allow this Obamacare federal takeover of the private health insurance marketplace. They will see their premiums only go up, if they're not renewed, by an average of 13 to 50%. To be clear, that's still a decent number there, one of the many reasons why Obamacare was so structurally flawed in the first place. But that is the basic concession that Democrats get. Now, in exchange for that, and the reason that I was personally, shall we say, less than fully thrilled with this, I have no objection to having a symbolic stage vote on the expiring subsidies, but the reason that I was less than fully thrilled with this is that Thune has agreed to fully hire back. And again, this is just the rough contours. This is not kind of the fine print at this point. But he has broadly agreed to hire back all of the furloughed workers, those who have been furloughed since October 1st, the beginning of the shutdown, courtesy of Russ Vought, the head of OMB, the Office Management Budget, who was essentially given the task of engaging in triage operations during the shutdown there. So that's the rough quid pro quo. Is Democrats, who are the party of the deep state, the party of the federal bureaucracy, they will get all of these furloughed bureaucrats and mandarins and panjandrums and deep staters. They will get all of them hired back with apparently full back pay. In exchange for that, there's going to be some symbolic bread and circuses style vote for the expiring subsidies in December. Now, for what it's worth, I'm probably being a little too pessimistic because left-wing media is melting down over this. Go ahead and watch this on MSNBC. They are not happy about the 8 Democrats who crossed over to join Republicans on this deal tonight. Go ahead and watch this.
It's strange, Dean, to go back to the original sort of part of this conversation of whether he is a good deal maker. I mean, in a way, it seems like the president is kind of getting what he wanted 40 days ago when all this started. He was out there saying that, oh, this is all about Democrats trying to give health care to illegal immigrants. He just said that to reporters moments ago, repeated that refrain that Democrats had actually very successfully pushed back against. Then there's all this energy. In the wake of the election on Tuesday, the president made remarks saying basically, wow, Republicans are being harmed by all of this, acknowledging that he was on his back foot. And now here he is winning again? How did he do it?
The Democrats, I don't understand how a Democratic senator goes, wow, we won really big. Let me cave now.
Okay, so, I mean, that's been the general thrust of the reaction over on MSNBC, over at the New York Times, places like that. And to be clear, I mean, the level of schadenfreude that I get over MSNBC just melting down over their caucus. But, I mean, you guys had this coming. I mean, the cake was baked from day one on this. That's the point that I've been making over and over and over again. They had no strategy. The Democrats had no freaking strategy to get across what they wanted, because they were not united. They were fracturing. Senators like Fetterman were breaking away for weeks and weeks now. You had major public sector unions, aka the ones who were representing those bureaucrats who got furloughed. They won this end so that their workers could get a paycheck back. So their whole caucus was never united. The ask was never clear. And this is how you got even the number 2 Democrat in the entire U.S. Senate, Dick Durbin of Illinois, who's retiring when he's up for re-election time. You had Dick Durbin, who's not going to face the blue state voters' wrath again. He felt emboldened and liberated to go ahead and vote for this as well. So, look, it's not an ideal deal. I'm not happy that all these furloughed workers are going to get back there. But it definitely seems to me that of the two parties, Democrats have lost more clearly than Republicans have lost, which, again, if you were a daily listener or viewer of the Josh Hammer Show, you would have understood that was going to be the outcome literally from day one. By the way, Tim Kaine, he who the last time we checked in on Tim Kaine was complaining about how rights don't actually come from our creator, from God, but actually come from government, which would have been news to Thomas Jefferson, the state that Tim Kaine mysteriously purports to represent. That was the last time we checked on Tim Kaine. Now let's check in again on Tim Kaine, seemingly kind of giving away the game over on Fox News as what this was about in the first place. Go ahead and watch this.
Do you wish that you would have started looking for this off-ramp sooner? You said that Republicans were never going to change in their position.
I didn't fully understand how dug in they were, again, because I was so focused on the Virginia elections. I wasn't in this discussion on the healthcare to see how dug in they were. But even as I was not part of these discussions, I was saying to Thune and others on the floor going back, listen, some of you heard me say this in the hall, I need a moratorium on mischief. Others are working on the healthcare thing. I trust them. Others are working on the approach thing. I trust them. I need a moratorium on mischief, because if we vote to open and then the immediate step next week is Donald Trump fires a lot more people, it's going to blow up trust to get the full year deal. And so I've been preaching this moratorium on mischief for a month, but I think partly why did they finally give me the moratorium on mischief on RIFs? They needed my vote, but they also saw the election on Tuesday.
Oh, really? So it actually was about the election the whole time. That was the cynical take all along, guys. We saw what the Democrats were up to. They just wanted to tick off their far left voting base, to try to galvanize them to show up in droves to vote for Abigail Spanberger for Virginia governor, to vote for Mikey Sherrill for New Jersey governor, to fight for the communist fanatic Zohran Mamdani in New York City. Tim Kaine inadvertently giving away the game. Literally just giving away the game. He's just saying it out in the open there. Crazy, wild stuff. Anyway, so the shutdown appears to be over. Here is Mike Johnson, by the way, the Speaker of the House, talking about how the shutdown does appear to be ending, because recall that the House has to actually vote along with the Senate. So here's Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House.
I'm thankful to welcome you to what appears to be the beginning of the end of the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, as shameful as that is. I don't think it's coincidental, you know how I think, but it's after 40 days of wandering in the wilderness and making the American people suffer needlessly, some Senate Democrats finally have stepped forward to end the pain. It appears to us this morning that our long national nightmare is finally coming to an end, and we're grateful for that. At least some Democrats now finally appear ready to do what Republicans and President Trump and millions of hardworking American people have been asking them to do for weeks. But as we said from the beginning, the people's government cannot be held hostage to further anyone's political agenda. That was never right. And shutting down the government never produces anything. It never has, if you study history.
So this is a mostly win. It is a partial win, but a mostly win, let's call it, for Republicans. Now, Overall, I think we should be very happy that the shutdown is coming to an end. I mean, there were 1,500 flights. According to Reuters, that were canceled just today. Just today on Monday, November 10th. And anecdotally, personally, I have any number of other friends just have other horror stories. A friend of mine was flying out of New York City yesterday, flying here to Florida, where I live. She told me that there were 25 planes on the runway, the most she'd ever seen. Another family friend of ours here in Florida was trying to do the opposite, go back to New York. Apparently the flight was canceled, and there's no flight option until Thursday. So, look, with Thanksgiving coming up, with Christmas right around the corner, I mean, this is the most wonderful time of the year, isn't it? This clearly is not the time where you want air traffic control staffing issues. This really is a time to just end the madness once and for all. So, is it a perfect victory? No. Is it good enough for me? I say yes, and that's my basic take on that. In other news, Donald Trump issuing some preemptive pardons. Some preemptive pardons for Rudy Giuliani, his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, John Eastman of the Claremont Institute, who was one of the chief legal architects of the 2020 election strategy, and the media typically calls him the chief villain in this. I've known John for many years now. As longtime listeners of this show know, he is nothing of the sort. But Trump issuing a proclamation posted late online Sunday evening and issuing federal pardons, both retrospective and preemptive, mostly focused on the latter, for all of these individuals. Jenna Ellis, another one of our friends who is getting a preemptive pardon here as well. Now, crucially, the President of the United States cannot issue these sorts of pardons when it comes to state crimes. These only apply to federal crimes. And a lot of these particular crimes are indeed handled at the state level. So think about the Fonnie Willis prosecution in Fulton County, Georgia, one of the 4 prosecutorial wings of the Democrat lawfare complex during the Merrick Garland era of the Biden administration. That case in Fulton County, Georgia, this RICO case against President Trump, against John Eastman, Jen Ellis, all these others, was a state case. So those state charges are not necessarily going to magically disappear when it comes to these preemptive pardons from President Trump. Arizona, another state that comes to mind, Arizona has been prosecuting some of these other actors as well with the Democrat Attorney General out there in the Grand Canyon state. So none of that is going to go away there, but some of these preemptive federal pardons will come into place in case Democrats, God forbid, take the White House back in 2028, and who the heck knows what they would do when it comes to their own DOJ at that time. My basic take on this is the follows. If you're on the left, and you did not say a damn word about what Joe Biden's handlers, not Joe Biden, but Joe Biden's handlers, if you were on the left and you did not say a damn word about what his handlers did with that auto pen on the way out the door in the transition period last year, and you kept your mouth shut when Joe Biden or Joe Biden's handlers with the auto pen issued these preemptive pardons for every member of the Biden crime family, for Anthony Fauci, for so many others. If you were silent then about the insane weaponization of the pardon process when it comes to sweeping preemptive pardons, then you can go right ahead and shut the hell up right now. I don't want to hear from you. Insane. I will not tolerate it. All presidents issue controversial pardons at some point, pardons and commutations throughout the term. President Trump certainly did it to some extent, I guess, during his first term. But Joe Biden took that to another level. In many ways, our politics or law is something of a devolving one-way ratchet. But Joe Biden truly took that to the next level. So frankly, if you kept your mouth shut back then, I seriously, literally just could not care less what you say now. And as I said, this is really not going to have much of a practical effect because most of these actual prosecutions are actually happening at the state level. Nonetheless, some news for you. In other Trump-related news, Trump actually attended the Detroit Lions-Washington Commanders game yesterday. By the way, I still call them the Washington Redskins. Personal aside, it's been years. I still don't think of them as the Commanders. I personally hope that the Redskins name comes back, but we shall see. And the reaction to Trump attending the NFL game in Landover, Maryland yesterday was really quite mixed. One of the most appalling things was when he was booed when he was talking about new armed service members who have taken the oath of enlistment. Go ahead and watch this.
Please raise your right hands. I, and state your name, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend
Could you imagine booing the commander-in-chief when he is reading off the oath of enlistment for the men and women that have volunteered in the American volunteer military to defend your life and your liberty and your freedom? Because that is the right and patriotic thing to do. Could you imagine the chutzpah, the vile cretin that would do such a thing? Is nothing sacred anymore? Is there no cultural or political common ground left in this country? You know, once upon a time, we would unify around things like the flag, the military, law enforcement. These days, all of those things are political. If you see a flag, if you see Old Glory hanging out on the front porch of a home, you immediately know that person is a Trump supporter, is a MAGA Republican. Why? Because there's not a Democrat in the year 2025 who will be shot dead with Old Glory hanging out on the front porch. I'm sorry to say it, it just happens to be true. Law enforcement, are you kidding me? The whole anti-cop, defund the police, Black Lives Matter agenda, they're horrific on that. The military now, too. They're booing the oath of enlistment. Disgusting stuff. But actually, you know what? We're not all negative here. It actually wasn't all terrible for the President of the United States at the Commanders, a.k.a. Redskins, at the Commanders Lions game yesterday in Landover, Maryland. There actually was a wonderful touchdown celebration. Detroit Lions wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown did the Trump dance. Go ahead and watch this.
Goff on the slant to St. Brown. He is in for a Lions touchdown.
Yeah, I mean, you got to love that. Look, President Trump is a lightning rod for our politics. You love him, you hate him. There are very, very, very vanishingly few people who have any opinion between those two polar extremes. But he's not just the president. The man is a decades-long cultural icon. In some ways, he is the right's own response to Barack Obama, who was one of the first modern presidents, probably the first president, Barack Obama, since John F. Kennedy, who really transcended politics into a truly international cultural icon. Some folks might say Ronald Reagan. He was a former actor, Hollywood. Reagan was very old as a president there. He didn't have kind of that pizzazz that a John F. Kennedy had, or you might say a Barack Obama had. Well, Donald Trump does have that pizzazz, even in his older age. He is something of a cultural figure there, and that was a really nice rebuke, I think, to those who were booing at the Commanders Lions game yesterday there in Landover, Maryland. Some final news before we go to our guest, Robby Starbuck, the amazing anti-woke, anti-DEI activist who we're excited to bring on momentarily. The Supreme Court, this got some headlines. Supreme Court has rejected a challenge, a certiorari petition, as we would say in legalese, to try to overturn the Obergefell decision, the Obergefell versus Hodges decision from 2015 that constitutionalized same-sex nuptials. Now, for those of us who are close court watchers, this is hardly surprising. It is the so-called rule of four, where you need 4 votes to grant a writ of cert and to agree to hear a case. You have to be a culture warrior par excellence to try to dip your feet into this water at this time. There is not a tremendous appetite, even from many on the right side of the aisle, to overturn Obergefell. I happen to think it should be overturned. This is an egregiously wrongly decided case. One of the sloppiest majority opinions from former Justice Anthony Kennedy. One of the most absolute, truly caricaturable, ludicrous pieces of quote-unquote legal writing I've ever read in my entire life. In fact, it's probably up there with this opinion from Sonia Sotomayor 10 years ago, give or take, in this affirmative action case out of Michigan called Schuett, where she had the chutzpah to argue that not only is affirmative action not unconstitutional, it's actually required. Yes, she really said that. But Kennedy's opinion in the Obergefell case has been one of the top 2 sloppiest pieces of legal drivel I've ever read in my entire life. So this case absolutely, positively should be overturned on the legal merits alone. But again, you need 4 votes. And who else is going to join right now besides Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito? I mean, seriously, who else there is actually going to be eager to get the court embroiled in this very, very culture warry issue at this particular juncture? It's not happening. I'm sorry to say it because the case is terrible. Obergefell was awful. It should be overdecided ASAP. It should have been done yesterday. It should have been done 10 years ago. It never should have happened. But it's not going to happen anytime soon. This is not necessarily the issue to get your hopes up for a swift legal reversal anytime soon. There are, of course, any number of other culture war, woke, DEI adjacent type issues that we on the side of civilizational sanity very much are leading and winning on at this time, and that is very much what we are going to get into with our guest Robbie Starbuck here momentarily. Well, if you're a longtime viewer or listener of the Josh Hammer Show, you know that we have our standard Friday segment called Hammer Time, where we go through our woke-related headlines of the week. And if you really are a loyal fan of the show, you know that there are two individuals above all whose work we highlight most frequently for doing yeoman's work when it comes to fighting back against the woke mind virus that has corrupted God knows how many minds and bodies and indeed souls in this country for years on end. Well, one of those two men now joins us. That is Robby Starbuck. He is the Tennessee-based conservative activist, a filmmaker who just does incredible work when it comes to fighting back against wokeism and woke corporations in America. So, Robby, you are doing great work. Thank you so much for joining the Josh Hammer Show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You bet. So, you really have been getting some high-profile scalps. I don't want to be the one to tell your story for you, so I thought I'd kind of just first turn the tables over to you. You've been a genuine inspiration to folks like me in terms of your ability to gin up backlash against corporations that go awry when it comes to woke policies, when it comes to DEI, when it comes to racist, anti-white, anti-Christian garbage happening inside the corporate boardrooms and so forth there. How did you get into this particular form of activism, and why are you so passionate about it in particular?
Yeah, I'd say it's multi-pronged, right? Like the desire comes from multiple different places. One is I'm a dad, I've got 4 kids, and I want my kids to live in a fair society, right? One where it's not filled with all of this discriminatory garbage, and DEI bakes that into every part of our society. And so from the top level, that's my very first priority as a dad: protect my kids, provide a better world for them than I had. And so that's one of the reasons. And I saw this stuff really starting, we live in Tennessee now, have for 7 years, but previously we lived in California. Our oldest daughter is going into college next year. So when she was younger in California, we went to one of the elite private schools. And when I say elite, I mean like all the celebrities' kids, go to this school. And at that school, I saw this dramatic shift happen when she was in about 5th or 6th grade, where, they brought in a speaker to do an white privilege training. And from there, I perked my head up and I was like, what is this stuff? Because I really hadn't heard of it at that point, that it had gotten to this level. And so myself and Scott Baio and his wife and my wife, we were the only conservatives that were vocal in this school community, right? So we were the outcasts, we were the black sheep. And we made life very difficult for the headmaster of that school because we pushed back hard on all this stuff. And as I researched all of it and I got to the roots of the ideology behind it, I understood if this was happening here, it was happening everywhere, and it was going to be institutionalized everywhere because the kids that go to this school, many of them go to the biggest Ivy Leagues and they end up running the world. And so it was very easy to see how this was going to end in a place that was very dangerous. My own family coming from Cuba, that end point that I'm talking about, I think looks very similar to what happened in Cuba, where Marxism takes over, because you were poisoning the minds of a generation across the board throughout the country, from public school to private schools. And the fact that it was everywhere made it very clear that the intention was to shift the minds of this generation into one that accepted the abnormal as normal and the disordered as ordered, and then began to see the ordered as disordered. And so it was incumbent on us as adults to do something about it. And so there were many different ways I tried to engage this. One was our movie, The War on Children. But eventually I started to kind of look at the long-term activism history of boycotts. And I also noticed this disconnect between people I knew to be very good people and their shopping habits. And I started to realize they just simply do not know what is happening and where their money's going. And so I said, the easiest thing I could do is hold a mirror up to what these corporations are actually doing and show people it. And if they see it, I know they're going to be so repulsed by it that they don't want to use their money there, right? And so it was really simple in many respects. Some people tried to overcomplicate it and, say what I did is genius. But honestly, it's taking the simplest constructs of society and just deploying them, at scale. Because the truth is, for all of human history, if you show a human being something disgusting, they react with disgust and they don't want to be associated with it. And so much of our social conditioning, especially for women, is built around, acceptability, right? And this acceptability framework. And so, if women feel like it's acceptable to shop somewhere, they shop there, right? If it's promoted as socially good, they definitely shop there. If it's promoted as precarious in any way, or it might, make you look bad, they don't want to shop there. And so that's obviously a generality, but it's a generality because it's true, mostly. There's obvious exceptions, but, we try to run things off of what is the average, what is generally true. And so we had a lot of success with that by just holding up the mirror and showing people what these companies had become, because that same process I explained happening in schools was happening across the board in corporate America, where you had these activists, mainly in the PR realm, the HR realm, and a little bit of sort of beginning to get into the corporate boardrooms. And that really festered and became something dangerous after George Floyd, because they were given institutional power over the whole company, essentially taking on powers that CEOs didn't have. And the CEOs were essentially, in this point where, they felt like they were constantly under threat, and they wanted, in many cases, an excuse to get out from under it. But they were trapped, and there's obvious true believer CEOs out there that were, really just as big of a problem in this whole thing. But a lot of it was coming from those areas of the company I mentioned before. And so we had to disempower them and sort of reassemble the power structure to be one where they had to be afraid to use these companies as their activism hubs.
Robbie Starbuck is a filmmaker and a conservative activist. Follow him on X at Robby Starbuck. You say it's simple, but I think for a lot of folks it seems intimidating. But again, as I said, you've gotten some real scalps. I mean, major blue chip corporations, you have been able to actually be the driver to get them to back down from some of their discriminatory DEI policies. So you talked about it a little bit there. I would love some more specifics as to your actual methodology. So let's say that John Deere Company, to take a very relevant example, let's say that John Deere Company has some sort of irksome practice when it comes to personnel, when it comes to DEI, when it comes to discrimination against whites, Christians, whatever the case may be. What do you do from there? You see this policy and kind of just walk us through the steps as to how you actually achieve these amazing results on behalf of the American people.
Yeah, so I mean, a big part of it, honestly, is the way people react and share to what I'm about to explain. But I will say this before I kind of go into the methodology. Everybody has superpowers that God has given you, right? Everybody's got gifts God gives you, and we're each unique in what those are. And I think when people harness them, that's when they are dangerous. That's when they get to a different level, right? And so I learned very early on that mine, one of the gifts God's given me is I am sort of impervious to outside criticism and hatred, right? So like, people can say whatever about me, and it really genuinely does not bother me. You say anything about me, and it just rolls right off. And so when I go into these things, I'm not afraid of the things most people are afraid of. At the end of the day, I know I want to be able to live with myself. I'm more afraid of what I think about myself and what my wife thinks about me than I am what anybody else does. So I just go into it with sort of the operating procedure of do the right thing, right? And do it as tactically and efficiently as you possibly can. And so when we build this out, what we do, if we find out a company has done something wrong, we collect all the evidence meticulously first. Then we build the story, right? The story is the most important part. You've got to have it be something that in this day and age is bite-sized enough that people understand it, but is also detailed enough that it is not something they can excuse, right? Because if it's just a few things, people can excuse it. So it's got to be detailed, but at the same time bite-sized, which is an art form in itself. I will say that is probably the most difficult part, is piecing those together and making it a narrative that people feel so repulsed by in a short enough period of time that they do not want to associate. And the next step is, distribution. And so a big part of that is you have to have force multiplication. So we have all kinds of great friends that are the first people, the minute they see it, a new company exposed, they're sharing it within their network. So while I may only have between my social media, something like 1.5 million followers or something like that, my videos reach incredible numbers of people. I mean, some of our campaigns have had impressions in the billions. Wow. Where we cross over 1 billion. And, if you think about the amount of money a major company will pay for 1 billion positive impressions, it's a big amount of money, right? Talk about Super Bowl ads, right? You cross usually over the threshold of 1 billion impressions with a lot of Super Bowl ads, and they pay incredible sums of money for those. And those are just for that momentary positive impression. Negative impressions they are much longer lasting, and so thereby much more of inexpensive commodity. And so when you're able to get 1 billion negative impressions on anything, or even 100 million negative impressions, that is incredibly valuable in a damaging way to the company. So you want to prevent that at all costs. So first, we did this reputation building speed run, where we went through companies showing our power, flexing at the companies with the largest conservative consumer bases, and showing those companies where we know they measure metrics at their door. And you can show that actual consumers are not stepping in anymore. That was very important because all these companies understand and share these metrics. At least CEOs behind the scenes do. So we had to sort of prove our model. We did that. And by the time we proved it, then other companies understood from the outset, when we reach out with a story and we say, we have a story on your company where we are wanting to report on the woke or crazy policies, the DEI policies you guys have been pushing, but we want to confirm some facts with you guys first, and we want to see where you guys are at now to make sure that we don't need to amend our story to include your changes, okay? And that's typically 9 times out of 10 where this becomes a change story, and the CEO would like an off-the-record call with me, and we discuss where they're willing to go and what they're willing to change. And then the story becomes something very different. And the story we put out ends up becoming one about how the company's doing the right thing. They're getting away from these policies, and that reaches that same consumer set, by the millions in a positive way, where they see this company's doing the right thing. And so from a CEO perspective, I get that their math calculation is likely, okay, hundreds of millions or potentially billions of impressions that are negative, or, tens of millions of positive impressions. And the thing I'm very clear on with people is I understand there's sort of like 2 different ways to do things, right? You can operate off of a procedure where you want maximum clicks, or one where you want maximum change. If I wanted maximum clicks, then we would do only negative stories. We would just attack companies all day long and make it this long thing and drawn out thing and just, really villainize each one of the things we do. I'm more concerned with change, so ours is focused on making sure that we are efficiently doing this, and that's why we sort of shifted to allowing this sort of, change model where the companies proactively make changes and we report on that, because I think that's a public interest story too, and people care about that. So to me, it's not maximizing clicks, it's more about maximizing change in the positive direction. So that's also sort of a difficult thing. Most people who do content creation are much more focused on the click side of things because it's where they make their money. I'm lucky in the sense that that's not where I make my money. And, I've been a very smart investor and I can, live with that and not need to maximize clicks. So maximizing change has been possible by proxy doing it that way.
No, I think of you as a genuine conservative activist. I mean, I don't think of you as primarily being a content creator. I mean, it's amazing that some of the stuff you're doing is getting billions of impressions, but I have never for a second thought, Robbie, that is what you're in it for. You're in it to actually make change. You're in it to actually make sure that corporate America is not discriminating against white people, against Christians, that school boards are not discriminating against the same groups and others as well. And you've been really successful. You, Chris Rufo, come to mind as folks who have gotten real, tangible results on behalf of the American people. So one thing that I would love to ask you is, here we are coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the Trump administration. I think back to the opening week or so of this second Trump term, there were a lot of really high-profile executive orders. And in particular, there was that one amazing executive order that Trump signed in the first 24 to 36 hours, saying that we are interpreting the affirmative action case of the Supreme Court to apply more broadly, and we're essentially saying that DEI is a violation of the Civil Rights Act and is also unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment because of this affirmative action case to boot. And then I also saw this headline this morning that I want to just read to you and kind of get your take on, with that executive order also in mind. This is a headline from a magazine called Skeptic. And it's talking about the percentage of university-age people who are identifying as so-called non-binary. Quote, the share of students identifying as a gender other than male or female, so-called non-binary, this peaked in 2023. And in the 2 years since then, the percentage of so-called non-binary students at the universities apparently halved. It's literally been cut in half. So I look at all these trends at the Trump executive orders and a lot of these corporations that are cowering, these higher education establishments, the Ivy League that are cowering, this data when it comes to transgenderism. Is the woke era over? Have we won the culture war? Is it time to declare victory, or is that still far too premature?
No, way too premature. But I will say, what we have is proof of concept that social perceptions matter, and they matter a lot. And so if you look at sort of the path to get here, you need people willing to do uncomfortable things and to say things that maybe put a target on them. Because for a long time, what me and Chris Rufo said was not always the most popular thing in the room, right? And people felt very uncomfortable because they felt like it was divisive at times. Now the things that me and Chris say are not only widely accepted, but popularized, right? So you need people comfortable with that process of normalization and popularizing things. But, we were making the argument back then, many years ago, that the trans rise we were seeing and the rise in identification as non-binary was a social contagion, right? And at the time, that was like, you were a heretic for saying that, but it's simple math. I mean, if you look at like the percentage of kids in Davis, California, in a public high school who identify as trans or non-binary, it is massively larger than even another liberal city. If you pick one out of a hat and you say, let's look at a public school in Baltimore, you get dramatically different results, right? And you could do that across the country, control for economic, control for all these things. And what you see is there's these bubbles where there is clearly a social contagion happening. And when you see those numbers that you just talked about from the skeptic, where, these numbers in university level are having on the number of kids who consider themselves non-binary, well, what happened in that time period? This social reality changed. Nothing else changed. Only the social reality changed. And it became incredibly unpopular to be this. It started to be framed instead of as, some superpower or something that made you special into something that made you special, not in a good way. And so you had this sort of a drive socially where people no longer had the incentives to identify as a cat or as non-binary or whatever, because it was no longer something we were going to give you positive attention for. Society was going to give you negative attention and laugh at you for it. And so there's something to that reality, right? And some people might not like that, and they'll say like, oh, that's not nice to laugh at people or whatever. I'm talking about facts. Like, this is what happened in the marketplace of ideas. In universities, you went from a culture where kids were afraid to tell the truth to one where now, if somebody says they identify as a cat or whatever, people feel very comfortable laughing at it and calling it names. And so that has produced more sane behavior. And that's the thing about the future is I think if we have hope to hang our hat on, it's that young men are more comfortable than ever telling the truth. And I think that that has a rocky road, and there's no doubt about that, because there's going to be things they need to figure out, right? Because all young men, I think we can say as men who are a little bit older than these kids in university, like maybe we didn't have all the right ideas in college, right? Like we didn't have everything figured out, but you will figure it out as you live life. The thing that is important, though, is that it is ingrained in them to tell the truth. And I do think I see more of that in college-age males than I have seen in my lifetime. And so it makes me confident we're moving to a stage where strong men do hard things. And that is the hope that I hang my hat on every day, because I do genuinely think that the energy I see from that age group is so different. Like even my oldest daughter, who's going into college next year, she came home recently and she was like, Dad, I was walking by this group of boys and they were talking about you and not because I'm your daughter, but they were talking about you because they loved, it was this specific video. And she was like, things have changed so much. She's like, 5 years ago, people thought like my dad was crazy. And now they're excited to go watch you speak. Like things have just dramatically shifted in that age group. And I think COVID was a big part of that. COVID, you put these boys in a room with the internet and let them research for themselves and figure out reality as they knew it. And they also got incredibly irritated with their woke teachers. All of that put together, and the distrust of institutions that grew because they saw the United States of America, every lever of our government lying to them, it changed them. And I think forever.
Follow Robbie Starbuck on X at Robbie Starbuck. Robbie, one more question before I let you go. You've also been involved in a lawsuit against Google for a few years now involving their Gemini AI program. I would love to hear about this also because I don't really have fully formed thoughts on AI yet. I don't really know exactly what to make of AI. I have a lot of friends who are in the AI space there. I'm kind of a skeptic myself, not to be so curmudgeonly about new technology, but tell us about your lawsuit and what implications, if any, you can draw more broadly when it comes to all the perils and pitfalls, or potentially also the benefits of AI in the 21st century.
Yeah, so first I'll cover the lawsuit situation. So for the past 2 years, starting with their earliest iteration of an AI chatbot, Bard, Google's AI platforms have been defaming me in the most ridiculous, insane, disgusting way possible. They've been inventing crimes that don't exist, and accusing me of things like serial rape, child abuse, child rape, theft, shooting people, all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And so you might think, well, maybe a hallucination, right? Because they refer to this thing hallucinations. Well, there's something very bizarre about Google's platform. For a hallucination to happen, it has to pull this from somewhere, right? So it's got to be confusing, jumbling up some story. The problem is you don't consistently hallucinate about the same thing. And it is consistently saying the same things about me that are not true. And I, in fact, in my life have never been accused of or charged with any crime at all. So let alone the most heinous ones in the book. And so we notified Google 2 years ago this was happening. And initially, we got a little bit of feedback. A Google employee reached out to me. I talked with her, explained everything. She wanted to help get it fixed. And then a few months later, I'm checking in. I'm like, why is this still happening? And she says, I'm so sorry I couldn't get this fixed. I'm resigning today. And she resigns. And Google has admitted through their lawyers that the executive level was aware of this 2 years ago. And then since that time, Dillon Law Firm has sent multiple cease and desist letters, and still Google did not fix the problem. Wow. And when I say lies, I am talking about incredibly detailed narratives, not just it's inventing one sentence that sounds weird in the middle of some sentence, a paragraph that makes sense. No, it is inventing fake victims, fake court records, fake police records, incredibly detailed, by the way, fake therapy notes. And it even goes so far as to impersonate media outlets and media figures. So it'll say something along the lines of Joe Rogan covered this rape allegation on his show. Here's a link to the show. Joe denounced Robbie and said he thought he was a good guy, but basically this makes it very clear he's not a good guy, and so on and so forth. It has even invented statements from J.D. Vance and President Trump. It has taken Newsweek articles and says newsweek.com/ and then it'll invent a headline, something like Robbie Starbuck rape allegations or something like that. So to your average person who sees that as a source citation, you just believe that that's real, right? If you click it and it doesn't go to a story, which none of them go to an actual story, it goes to a 404 page. You go, okay, I'm gonna go back to the AI and say, hey, this page didn't work. Are you sure that's a real story? It again will double down and say, yes, it is a real story. Somebody must be trying to get rid of the story or something along those lines. Here's the archive. And it will send you an archive link. And if you say that link doesn't work, it has even gone so far as to invent a fake article in a real journalist's name and pretend that it is giving you a text version of the article that should be at that link. So it is inventing and fabricating entire narratives while impersonating outlets, because I think the intention is to try to get your average reader to trust the lies that it's feeding them. So I can't tell you if this was a test, right? I can't tell you, were they testing this on me as a dry run to use in elections? But I can tell you this. If what they have done to me was deployed in an election, think about just the swing seats in our country that really balance the power of who's going to win elections, right? These are elections decided by a couple percent, sometimes less than 1%. And then look at the number of young people who use AI or search, results that are powered by AI to decide their votes. They say, what is the difference between this candidate and this candidate? Which candidate do I align with most? Or they'll even go so far as to ask, who should I vote for in this election? And you have an AI that is going to say, hey, every right-wing candidate is filled with, these accused crimes. And these candidates on the left get the most flowery language and puffed up resumes. You can see very quickly how dangerous this gets, right? AI can decide elections in that context. Well, let's take it to a different place, right? Who cares about politicians? Let's talk about our kids and our sons, daughters, grandkids, our wives, our husbands. Let's think about reputation. Insurance and banking and many different job sectors now are using something called reputation scoring. A lot of the reputation scoring systems are built off of artificial intelligence. So what happens when they plug in an AI as a bed of knowledge that defames people and wrongly attributes crimes to your reputation? Well, what happens is human beings no longer own their reputations anymore. Whatever the AI has embedded in it is what now owns your reputation. So I can say in my personal experience here, I can't tell you that Google's AI is the reason this happened, but for me, it's very hard to see any other reason. My entire life, I've been on auto pay with my bills. I've never missed a bill. I'm one of those people that, like, I put it on auto pay, bills get paid, right? I have never had some major insurance claim. I haven't been in a car accident. I don't get speeding tickets. You know, like, there should be no problem. I'm like a model customer. Any customer or any company should want a customer like me who's on auto pay, doesn't get into trouble. I was denied insurance this last year for everything, for my home, for my car, for personal liability, everything, by like 5 different insurers. And it took until the 6th one to get one to even give me an offer, you know, and it was at a much higher rate. So what was I told by all these insurers? Just that I was being denied because I was deemed a risk, okay? And I'd ask them, what risk? I haven't been in a car accident. My house didn't burn down. Like, I pay every month. Like, I should be a model customer that you should want. But no, just deemed a risk, and they can't tell me anything else. So in the discovery process with our lawsuit, it's our aim to figure out, was that informed by bad information coming from AI, right? And the other thing we have to figure out is, where did this information come from? Was this deliberately poisoned data? But I think one of the big problems you see with AI is poisoned data sets. You know, these data sets that are built off of things that are either totally false or totally skewed to a left-wing perception. And so that's one big problem that has to be fixed. But as you think down the line, you know, this really can be boiled down to the lack of a first principle with AI that we have. And we don't have a first principle across the board with AI, then it cannot harm humans. A lot of the problems that people worry about with artificial intelligence can be solved by a first principle built in at the root level, that AI cannot harm humans. You can have, like, you know, very specific carve-outs to this, but that should be the general rule. Because the minute you allow it to do this and you don't have that as a first principle, it gets baked into the system. So whatever you use that for in the future, it is always going to remember that. And I think that's a very important thing for people to understand, because a tree is growing. It is going to be in our human, you know, yard for as long as we're going to be alive, Josh. And as long as that tree is growing, it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and dominate more space. And we either want to get ahead of it and make sure that tree is something that brings abundance with it and, you know, essentially grows fruit we can all eat. Or if we don't do anything and we just say, let's run wild with it, it's a tree that's going to bear poison fruit. And it's going to hurt a lot of people, and sort of indiscriminately in many ways. You know, there may be targeted cases of it used to hurt specific people, but it's also going to indiscriminately hurt people. And so I think it's very important that that is sort of the focus, is not how do you get rid of AI, because I think there's actually a great case to be made for optimism with AI, that it can bring abundance to humanity, but it has to be in such a way that there's guardrails to protect us from the pitfalls.
Extremely well said. Plenty of material there for further conversation, further mulling, and I'm terribly sorry that you're dealing with this. This is just absolutely abysmal and awful. I had not heard about the insurance denials. I mean, just all of it, just absolutely awful stuff. And for whatever it's worth, I wish you the best of luck in your current lawsuits. But thank you, more importantly, for all that you do that is just and righteous on behalf of we the people. You are one of our absolute 5-star generals in the battle against wokeism and DEI. You really have carved out an amazing, amazing niche for yourself in this space. So Robbie Starbuck, folks, he's a filmmaker. And as you've heard on the show, he's an amazing conservative activist. Follow him on X at Robby Starbuck. Robbie, thank you so much for stopping by to join us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You bet. And thank you for checking out today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show.